Hey guys, it's Steve from Valor Replicas. So, day one build of the box for my Da Vinci Code Cryptex. So, just a reminder, this is what we're heading toward here, is a replica of the box that we use in the film. So the first thing that we're going to do, the first thing we need to figure out is the scale of this thing. And again, I have a Cryptex that I believe is pretty spot on from a size accuracy standpoint. So from there, I'm able to take photos like this and make some judgment calls on the dimensions of the box. But really, the first thing I need to figure out is kind of the diameter of this pentagon. The box is a 5-sided pentagon and the Cryptex sits in it. So I've mapped out, and it's pretty tight, how this fits in there. There's not a lot of space around it. So I've figured out what I believe to be the outer diameter of that pentagon. And more importantly, I figured out and mapped out what some of these angles are, because each side of this box is going to be a piece of wood that I'm going to need to bevel to join these 5 pieces together. So this gives me that information. And I'm going to be building that out of this, which is just a 3mm plywood. So first thing I'm going to do is jump to the table saw, and I'm going to rip out a whole bunch of side pieces to the width and to the angles that I need. And that's how we're going to start our box build. So here we go. So I didn't record myself doing this on the table saw because I needed all my focus to do this safely. And honestly, I wasn't using the most safe table saw practices. I had to bevel the blade to run all of this 3mm plywood through and cut these 2 bevels on the side. And I cut out more than I needed because I'm probably going to screw a few of them up, but these will be the sides of the piece. Okay, so I have cut all of the sides for my Cryptex box, and these are all beveled on the sides on the table saw. That, by the way, was not a fun thing to do. So now I need to glue all these together into my 5-sided box, and instead of trying to hold all of these in like perfect orientation, what I did was I 3D printed this 5-sided interior structure so that I can hold everything nice in orientation. I'm hoping I can use this to glue everything up. I have all 5 sides set to glue together, and I have my form that I'm going to glue it to. I think I can pretty much just get the first 2 started and mount them onto my my internal structure and secure it with rubber band, and then just work my way around adding one at a time. I'm just going to hit time lapse and see how this goes. So the end of the box, the 2 ends of the box, aren't squared off ends. They are sort of this multifaceted dome shape. And it looks like this from the end. So all of these individual facets create this 5-sided star on the end, which is super cool. The size of each of these facets creates a relation to, how big this is going to be. So I've been playing around with getting the proportions and the size of all of these things right, and then printing off individual ones and then folding these together to figure out what the height of the geometry is going to be, and how much is too tall, how much is just right, so that when I place it on the end of my fake box here, that I get sort of the right scale of this. And when I do this in wood, like each one of these facets is going to be an individual piece of wood that I'm going to have to bevel to the right angle and glue the whole thing together. So I want to make sure that I get all of the sizing and the proportion of these right on paper before I start cutting wood. So I trimmed all of the shapes out for all of the facets of one side of my dome of a box, and glued them to a piece of the same 3mm plywood that the box is made out of. I'm going to cut these out with a handsaw, and then use a small disc sander that I have to sort of creep up on the exact dimension And then from there, I'll need to sort of like file down by hand the bevel of each of these sides. So this is one side, and I'll have to do this again for the second side. So I know this would probably go faster with a bandsaw, but I'm a little worried about a bandsaw kind of breaking out the backside of this plywood. So I'm just going to use this this little thin saw that I have to work my way through all of these. I wanted to share a quick tool tip. You probably see that I'm doing a lot of sanding of these individual pieces on what looks like a piece of board. I've sort of developed a system over the years that makes all the sanding that I do a lot simpler. So I wanted to share what that looks like. What I've built over the years is a series of sanding boards that I used almost every single day. So these are a 1/2 inch thick MDF that I've cut down to be the size of a piece of commercially available sandpaper. And I've mounted a piece with spray mount, a piece of sandpaper to each side of that board. And I have a set of boards for sort of all the most common grits that I use. And these are great because it allows me really quickly to take a part where I want to smooth out the back or change something flat and work my way down to other different levels of grits to smooth this out. And I know that this surface is super flat. It allows me to make really quick work of sanding, and it makes it a lot more enjoyable. Okay, so here's where I'm at with the outer shell of the box. And again, everything worked up really, really nicely. Now, what I need to do, and you saw, I now have sort of a building collection of all of these individual facets that are going to create this dome structure on the top. And I've been struggling with, like, how do I start gluing all this together and make sure that I keep this geometry of this dome structure accurate. I didn't want to just start sort of attaching it to this and have these pieces start to sag in. So what I did is on my 3D printer, I printed off another piece of structure that I'm going to use to make sure that as I'm adding these pieces on top, that I'm hitting the geometry correctly. So I've glued one of those on top of my original structure, which then fits into my box like this. And then what I've been slowly doing is piece by piece gluing individual facets together so that I'm getting all of these geometrically sound and lined up. So this is how one of the ends is coming together. But then to glue this together to make it nice and quick, I'm not using wood glue. I'm using CA glue, super glue, along this edge, and then using an Instaset, an accelerator for that super glue on the other end, so that it bonds really quickly and locks into place. So you only hold it for about maybe 10 seconds. And then that Instaset kicks the super glue really quick, and then off we go. Yeah, I'm kind of digging how this is starting to fit and form together as an outer box structure. So finish up this end, and then I got a whole second end to go. There we go. So I have got both ends attached to the central portion of the box. And I've got something that's starting to feel like the box itself now. I'm really, really happy with how this has turned out. I did smooth everything out to get that nice sort of multifaceted look. I'm really happy with how this looks. But now we got a problem. This is not a box that you can get into. I have built it as a block. And that's really common with how you would want to build a box that you're going to sort of have a lid and a base for. So what we need to do now is cut this in half with where you want the lid and the base to separate. So if you look at the source material, the base is the bigger part, and the top is a smaller part. And actually this side view shows me exactly what I need to know, which is exactly where along the central band of this entire thing that this thing segments. And I can tell that they did the same thing with building the box before cutting it, because if you look at how things are lining up, there's a gap. There's a little bit of a gap where it was the kerf of the saw as they went through. So I'm going to do the same thing. What I need to do is cut this with as careful a process as I can. And so what I'm going to be using is called a Japanese pole saw. So it's a really, really thin saw that you're able to do really, really delicate work. And I'll show you the jig that I'm setting up to do this. So because I'm not just going to set this in a vise and just get to work on it, I want to make sure that I'm sort of sawing each side of it really carefully. Oh, also on the inside, if you remember my 3D printed substructure that I had in there, that's still in here. And I'm doing that for a reason. I'm doing that so that this thing is nice and solid. So once I begin sawing and maybe applying pressure to this thing, that I don't end up cracking it. So I'm not going to be cutting clear through it. I'm going to be cutting one face at a time as I go around. And to do that, I built a jig to make that easier. All this is a couple of pieces of MDF, a couple of pieces of styrene stacked on top of each other, because when I lay my saw down flat on the face, it lines up on the box exactly where I want to cut. So I'm going to be able to very carefully keep this saw blade flat and work and turn one side at a time. Again, all I have to cut through is the 3mm thickness of the material as I turn this and I go around and do face by face. I'm going to be very carefully and surgically cutting each one of these faces. And once I go around the whole thing, I should have a box and a top, and I should be ready to go. All right, here's the reveal. I have a box. I have a top and a bottom that mate together perfectly. That went really well. I don't know if you could see in the time lapse, but there were times where I was trying to hold down the saw as it was moving back and forth. Again, I didn't want that saw to sort of like skip and cut this crooked in any way. I also didn't want to chip out any of these little facets on the end here. It's one of the reasons I didn't just throw this on a bandsaw and just slide this thing through. I really wanted to make sure that I was doing a nice clean cut for both the inside and the outside, and I seem to have. So I'm really pleased with how that went. I did screw one thing up. You remember I mentioned that I put that 3D printed structure back on the inside to hold this thing steady. That was both good and bad. The bad thing is this is wider than the opening that I have remaining on this lid. So right now this is stuck in here and doesn't come out. So I will probably have to find a couple of ways to cut this thing and remove this thing from my top. But that is a simple thing to recover from. But I have my base box now, and I think the next video we're going to move on to looking at some veneer and start looking at how this thing looks, and that should be very exciting. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe to support my channel, and stay tuned because there'll be another video following the progress of this project. Thanks a lot.